Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to be here with Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, to talk about our first piece of legislation for the fall session, the Alberta Bill of Rights, and our government's actions to safeguard the rights and freedoms of all Albertans. In 1905, our province was founded as a free and democratic society. Alberta was built by people who valued freedom, family, and fundamental rights, values Albertans still embrace today. In 1972, those rights were enshrined in the Alberta Bill of Rights, a document that protects, among other fundamental rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to equality before the law. The Bill of Rights has served us well, but it's been more than half a century since it was introduced. In an ever-evolving world, we must be vigilant to ensure the rights and freedoms of Albertans continue to be protected. And that's why today I'm announcing the proposed amendments that, if passed, would strengthen the Alberta Bill of Rights and ensure our province remains one of the freest societies in the world. You've already heard me speak a lot about our updates, but with the legislation drafted and ready for debate, I'm pleased to reiterate these important changes. Ultimately, a free, democratic society relies on the ability of its citizens to make decisions willingly, express themselves freely, own property, and use it as they see fit. And it also relies on citizens' autonomy over their bodies and the right to make their own choices about the medical treatments they receive. No one should be pressured into accepting any medical treatment without their full consent, including a vaccine. If passed, this amendment would protect an individual's right to refuse medical care, medical treatment, or a medical procedure unless that person lacks the capacity to make a choice or is likely to cause harm to themselves or others. In addition, we're tabling amendments to further protect freedom of speech in our province. Albertans value freedom of speech, and it's something that's already enshrined in the Alberta Bill of Rights. But our proposed amendments would expand the scope of this right to include expressive activities beyond written and spoken language. Freedom of speech is one of the most important hallmarks of a democracy, and so this update is critical. Like it, the protection of property rights is a cornerstone of living in a free society. Albertans are also people who work hard to earn a living, provide for their families, and enjoy the right to acquire property. We will strengthen those rights so no Albertan can be deprived of their property without legal authority and just compensation. This is an affirmation of your own right to own and enjoy the property that you have worked so hard to earn. And finally, as people who come from a long line of farmers and ranchers, many Albertans continue to value a way of life that includes the legal use of firearms for their livelihood, for hunting, and for sport. For too long, the federal government has unfairly targeted law-abiding firearms owners who've done nothing more than exercise their legal rights. And we've seen an escalation from Ottawa in recent years. So we're pushing back and reinforcing your right to acquire, keep, and use firearms in accordance with the law. And we're sending a message to Ottawa that Albertans will not forfeit these rights. Let me be clear, our government will always stand up for the rights of Albertans. It is our honor and our duty to do so. Our province is founded and grounded on individual freedom and personal responsibility. These amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights are not just legal changes. They are a reaffirmation of the values that make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions on earth. They are about protecting our rights and our freedoms and ensuring our province continues to be home to freedom, democracy, and a way of life that we will continue to cherish for generations. Thank you. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Minister Mickey Amery to provide more details.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Premier, and good morning. I'm proud to be standing here with the Premier today to announce proposed changes to the Alberta Bill of Rights. The Premier has already provided an overview of some of these changes. I'd like to add that many of the proposed amendments in the Bill of Rights relate to recommendations from the Public Health Emergencies Governance Review Panel. This expert panel reviewed the legislation and governance practices of government during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Almost a year ago, the panel provided our government with a report containing many recommendations. I was tasked with reviewing the panel's findings and recommending which ones should be implemented. Many of the proposed amendments in the bill that we are introducing today relate to recommendations the panel made to improve protections for Albertans' rights and better align with the Alberta Bill of Rights and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm proud to be taking a significant step towards addressing the panel's recommendations with this bill. In fact, we have gone beyond the panel's recommendations and the Charter to address issues important to Albertans and reinforce that Alberta's government is committed to protecting their rights. Now, the Premier has spoken about the rights that we're adding to the Alberta Bill of Rights. These protections would be meaningless if they could not be enforced. To make sure that Albertans can enjoy the rights included in the Alberta Bill of Rights, further amendments would strengthen the Act to make it a more robust civil rights document. I won't get into the details of all of the amendments here, but I'd like to highlight a couple of the key changes. For example, if the bill passes, the Alberta Bill of Rights would apply to all provincial action. The Act currently only applies to laws in Alberta, such as regulations, statutes, or similar documents, and actions taken under those laws. With these proposed amendments, the Alberta Bill of Rights would apply to all government actions, programs, and policies, regardless of whether they specifically flow from a particular law. Expanding the Act to apply to all provincial action would protect Albertans from a larger scope of government activity and align the Alberta Bill of Rights with the way the Charter applies to government action. Another proposed amendment would strengthen protections for Albertans' rights by giving the courts greater ability to grant remedies when it finds rights under the Alberta Bill of Rights have been breached. Currently, when an individual claims an infringement of rights protected under the Alberta Bill of Rights, the court is limited to trying to apply the law so that it does not infringe on these rights. Examples of remedies that the court could impose if the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act passes include ordering the government to pay damages, ordering an injunction to temporarily stop the legislation from taking effect, or declaring the legislation to be of no force or effect. In addition to adding rights and strengthening the Act, 3 proposed amendments to the preamble of the Alberta Bill of Rights would address values important to Albertans, specifically freedom, family, and the rule of law. The Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act responds to concerns our government has heard from Albertans regarding their fundamental rights and freedoms. If passed, the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act would strengthen the rights of Albertans and continue to serve Albertans well in an evolving society and reflect our shared values. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Minister. We'll now turn it over to media. We have a few minutes this morning, so it'll be one question, one follow-up. Please state your name and outlet for the record. We'll start here in the room and we'll go to the phones. Shaylin, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, the question is for the Premier. I'm sure you're aware of the weeks leading up to this legislation following your social media posts. Critics have said that this is about appealing to members of your base ahead of your weekend leadership vote. I have questions about what is motivating this legislation specifically, and can you point to specific examples in which people's rights have been infringed in the ways that this bill is being amended and they didn't have the right to appeal this in court?
Well, I can tell you that I've been advocating for fair compensation to be in a Bill of Rights since about 1997. So I guess I'm going on almost 30 years of wanting to make this change. And part of it is that you do have governments that sometimes take away the use of property without giving compensation. So this will expand to not only expropriation, but also to regulating away the use of property. So that is something I've been an advocate for decades and have given many speeches on it. So people shouldn't be surprised by that. People also shouldn't be surprised that we're implementing the decisions and the recommendations from the Preston Manning Review Panel on emergencies. That was the whole point of him doing that review panel, was to identify some areas of legislation that needed to be revised to make sure people's rights were protected. So I would say those would be probably the 2 most important areas that we needed to make sure we bridge the gap. And then I guess thirdly, with the federal government intending to confiscate firearms that have been purchased by law-abiding citizens, we're wanting to let them know they're in for a fight on that. We've demonstrated in multiple ways that we're prepared to fight them on that. We think that the federal criminal code should be focused on the criminal use of firearms. They should be focused on smuggling. They should be focused on gangs and organized crime using firearms in crimes. They should be worried about people who use the guns to commit a crime. They shouldn't be targeting law-abiding hunters and sport shooters and collectors. So we're prepared to also demonstrate that we believe that this is an area under property and civil rights, which is our area of constitutional jurisdiction, where we're prepared to draw a line.
Just some clarity, and then also for my follow-up, my understanding is the Bill of Rights only applies to provincial laws, not federal ones, particularly around firearms, which falls under federal jurisdiction. So hoping you can clarify that aspect. And then also, just wondering about specific definitions around the medical treatment and vaccine refusals, specifically around the words like capacity, compel, or coerce, and substantial harm. How will they be defined in this legislation?
Well, look, I mean, the federal government thought that they could use their power to arbitrarily decide that plastics were something that could be regulated under the criminal code, and the court spanked them down. They said that that was not a legitimate use of that power, and so we're prepared to have this argument. We believe that law-abiding firearms owners should purchase their firearms in order to be able to use them as a tool on their farm or ranch, be able to use them in sport shooting, which has been a long-established tradition in our country, as well as using it for collection or inheritance. We think that those are long-established principles. So we're prepared to draw a line and say, yes, the federal government, stay in your lane and focus on the criminal use of firearms, but don't be regulating on property and civil rights, which is an area of provincial jurisdiction. And I guess we'll see how the court determines that. I'll turn it over to the minister to talk about the legal understanding of capacity, coercion, and compelling.
Thank you very much, Premier. And these are concepts that you mentioned, coercion, compulsion, that have been well established in the case law year after year after year. They've been decided on by various courts across this province and across this country. We'll utilize that framework in defining those words, and we'll allow the courts to make those determinations using the precedent that they've established and the case law that already exists.
Janet? Yeah.
I believe this is for the Premier. So it sounds like a public sector employee would have to take a provincial employer to court if they required a vaccine that they didn't want to get. So why not just tell provincial entities you can't have vaccine mandates rather than putting the onus on the worker? Or is that a future plan to tell these entities they can't have the mandates?
Well, look, I mean, we're making it pretty clear what the relationship is between our government and its citizens. I think when we turn back the clock a couple of years, I think we'll realize that a lot of those mandates came in because of provincial government mandates, provincial government direction, and provincial government sanction. And we're letting people know we're not going to do that. That the provincial government will not put in mandates that force somebody to take a medical procedure that they don't want to take.
Just to follow up, there's this group of grassroots supporters, right, UCP supporters, who want your Bill of Rights to go a lot further than what we're seeing in these embargoed documents. Thinking about limiting reproductive rights even, or the right to use firearms to protect their own property. So how likely are we to see further amendments to the Bill of Rights within your mandate?
Well, this has nothing to do with reproductive rights. And I would say that I've been pretty clear that we want to stay within our lane. Property and civil rights are our lane. Criminal code is not our lane. That's the federal government. And so there are certain things that we can do and certain things that we would have to rely on a change to the Canadian Bill of Rights if they wanted to put more robust language around it. Remember, the Canadian Bill of Rights came in 1960. And so there is an opportunity for members who feel like the federal government needs to replicate what we're doing for them to be able to advocate for that at the federal level. But we're going to stay in our own lane.
Graham, you have the...
So, Premier, just one point clear on this. Is it okay then for, say, a nurse in a hospital to refuse to get a vaccine if the hospital says, look, you're dealing with patients, you need to get vaccinated against whatever. Are you saying the nurse says, I don't want to, and then, okay, fine, she can deal with patients without getting vaccinated against diseases that may be passed on to patients?
The entire purpose of this particular amendment and the Bill of Rights in general is to govern the relationship between government policies and individual Albertans and the rights that they enjoy and that the rights that we've all valued. The relationship between the Alberta Bill of Rights as it relates to government relationship with their employees is well articulated within the amendments that are coming forward and with the existing Bill of Rights and the case law and the decisions that have come out of it. We're telling people that the government must be balanced and must take a careful approach when imposing any type of rules, policies, regulations, or acts that may infringe on the Bill of Rights, the list of the enumerated rights within the Bill of Rights. That does include protection from one being coerced into doing something that they don't want to do as it relates to their medical autonomy if they don't wish to do so.
What then protects a patient from a nurse or whoever is not getting vaccinated? If somebody in hospital who is sick, what then rights do they have to be protected against a healthcare worker who refuses to get vaccinated?
Well, the purpose of any policy that we impose as a government needs to be balanced. It needs to find an adequate approach between the needs and the rights of an individual and the policies that we impose as government. It's difficult to speculate on a scenario or any scenario going into the future. We've learned a lot from what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to try to address it right in the future policies that we impose going forward. We'll find that balance as they arise.